Dave, I think you're muted.
Welcome to today's webinar, Help Your New Treasurer Get Started with Church360 Ledger. I'm glad that you've joined us today, and we look forward to showing you a little bit more of Church360 Ledger. My name is Dave Arnhem, and I am a software consultant here with Concordia Technology Solutions. And I've been working with Concordia for a number of years and really enjoy helping churches with software and helping churches to be able to have a software that really helps them in their day-to-day job. I'll be doing the introduction, but Peter Frank is our Senior Manager of Marketing here at Concordia Publishing House. He's actually going to be hosting and walking you through the software today. So Peter will be joining us in just a moment here to walk us through that. Now, a little bit of housekeeping that we have today. There'll be approximately 50 minutes for presentation, followed by 10 minutes for questions. Now, keep in mind that you can ask questions throughout. I'm going to be in the chat area, so you can ask your question at any time, and I'll be glad to answer questions throughout the webinar again today. And then the recording is going to be shared for all of you that are here, and also for some that may have signed up but weren't able to attend for one reason or another. You'll still get a recording of the webinar here today. The Concordia Technology Solutions, exactly who are we? Well, we are the church administration division of Concordia Publishing House. And we've been developing software for churches since 1984, so it's been a little while here. A few assumptions that we'll have as we begin the webinar today, that is that you're new to Church360 Ledger, and that you're not an accountant. And they're extremely busy. Now, there may be some that are an accountant, but we're going to have that assumption to begin with. Church360 Ledger is really a part of a suite of products of Church360. Those other products are Church360 Members, and that is our membership management software that assists churches with the people data and attendance and offering data. Again, if that's something of interest to you, even afterwards, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm going to put my contact information on later, and I'd be glad to assist you or answer questions for you later. And then also the third leg of that stool really would be the Church360 Unite, which is our website builder and online communication tool. Unite, we are having a webinar on that even this afternoon. So feel free to join us on that. And you can actually join that webinar by just going to 360unite.com/training. Now, the Church360 Ledger has been designed really to be intuitive, it's secure, and it's focused on the work of the ministry of the treasurer. And as we were beginning to focus on Ledger and creating it, what were the goals of the Ledger? Well, we realized that the church finances are really often managed by volunteers. And most volunteers are not accountants. And accountability is extremely important in the church. And we wanted to also help in preventing the ill intention from doing wrong, but also preventing the well intention from making mistakes. So it was designed to increase accountability in the 360 Ledger, and it was also designed to prevent mistakes. Now, a little bit on the outline for today's webinar. It's going to be an overview of the software. We'll also look at the chart of accounts, the transactions, including the credits and debits, reconciliation, and again, at the end, a time for some questions and answers. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to transition this over and bring and introduce Peter Frank to you. So if you'll bear with me just a moment, Let me go ahead and do that here for us.
Well, while you're doing
All
that,
right.
can you hear me okay?
Yes, I sure can.
All right, excellent. I always like to double check that and make sure I'm not talking to nobody being able to hear anything. But thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you to all of our attendees for being here today. And if you're watching the recording, I'm sorry you couldn't attend live, but thanks for watching it after the fact. Today, our topic is all about introducing a new treasurer to Church360 Ledger. And this is a topic that I'm very familiar with because my church uses Church360 Ledger, and we just got a new treasurer and I helped him get up and running. So I'm going to bring a lot of that experience right back into this. Now, I am not an accountant by any means, but one of the first things I did when I joined the CTS team back in 2012 was to meet with our development staff who had just started developing Church360 Ledger. And so I have been with this product kind of the whole way through. And so it's really awesome to just see where it's at today, see how churches are using it, see some of the best practices that others have developed. That's the thing with software. We can develop it how we see fit. But if our customers are not leading that development, it's only going to be as good as we are. But we've got these communication channels with customers, and we're constantly talking with them day in, day out to find out exactly what works best for them. And so many of the changes that we have made in Church360 Ledger over the years are based on what you, our customers, have said. And so I'm able to take that. That was the great thing about me being in our church, getting the new treasurer, is I can say, well, I'm not going to pull from my personal accounting experience. I'm going to pull from my development experience and train you, the new treasurer. So that's what I'm going to walk through today. We're going to go through an overview of the software. We're going to look at some of the key things that are just kind of standard that you've got to know. But I'm going to do it in the order that I went with our new treasurer to help him get up and running in a way that you can help your future treasurer, or maybe you are that treasurer, get up and running with it. So the first thing I want to do is just show you the navigation, show you the way the page is set up. And if you're using this, you have the same ability that I'm going to show you just now, but sometimes when I'm presenting, I know it's a little bit hard to see. In fact, I want to make sure on my audience view, you're seeing the right things that I am. There's a lot of white space right now, and I like having white space on the edges so that for me, it frames it, but I know that's going to make it harder for you to see. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And you can zoom in as well using Control and plus on your keyboard, or Control and the scroll on your mouse. So we'll go with that. If it's too zoomed in, I'm going to have trouble seeing it. It's going to be too large for me. But this navigation is pretty straightforward. Up at the top, you've got some tools that always stay with you. This first thing here, this where it says Christ Community, that's the name of our book. Now, it also is the name of our church, but I'm going to talk about books in a minute, so we'll come back to that. On the far right, you've got some icons here. The first one is our print queue. We'll talk about that when we get into transactions. Also with transactions are your pending transactions. This gives you a drop down of available transactions. We'll look at that in a little while too. Then you have reports. There's some basic reports there that you can modify to meet your needs. And we've got settings. Settings is where we'll spend quite a bit of time at the beginning. And then you've got your user settings and logout. We're not really going to get into that too much. The next row here is what we call our chart of accounts omnibar. Now, I don't know why it's called omnibar. That's more of an internal language, but if you hear me refer to it, that's why. So this actually allows you to go through and quickly jump to any of your accounts. We're going to talk about accounts in a few minutes to make more sense. Next, we have our new transactions. There's these different transaction paths. These we'll get into quite a bit of detail, but we've got to have everything in place first before we can start doing transactions. Now you're down to the account view, and you'll see here, I'm going to move out of the navigation just to focus on this. We've got what we call our breadcrumbs. Now, you don't need to have these reports here. You can kind of hide those if you want. But these breadcrumbs allow you to navigate through the chart of accounts and see those current balances. It's just an easy visual way to navigate. On the far right, you have the ability to export to Excel, to print, to change your date range. We're going to go through all of that in a few minutes, but these are pretty consistent throughout it as well. And then this chart shows you the balance of the view that you're on over time, and it gives you a nice kind of running balance. Then the real meat of this, and why we call this Church 360 Ledger, is that your table of transactions, your general ledger, is always front and center. So you're not having to go and figure out exactly what makes up those totals. You're always going to see the transaction details. I know I just shared a whole lot. What I wanted to do is kind of lay the groundwork. Now we're going to get into the individual details. So don't worry if that doesn't all make sense quite yet. In Church 360 Ledger, we have this definition of a book, which is essentially a digital way of saying if you pulled out your general ledger, this is your book of all your transactions, all of your accounts, all your financial details. And in a church setting, you might have more than one book. So in my church, we have a school attached to it. Now it's a one-to-one school, so we keep those all under one set of books. But I know many organizations will have a set of books for the church, and a set of books for the school, and maybe a set of books for the ladies guild or for the men's club or any of those things. If you manage your finances and divide them separately like that, Church 360 Ledger works in that same way for you. We're going to go down here to settings, and we're going to go to books. There's a number of different books here for example purposes. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new one to start fresh today. And we're going to call this, let's just call it church. So this is our church book. We'll call it that. And let's say we're going to be starting our fiscal year in September. I know many churches started in the summer. Usually it's not in September, but we're going to go ahead and say that. And then we're going to actually move the starting date back to last September, just so that we've got that, so that we're kind of nearing the end of our fiscal year. And then I'm going to go ahead and submit. So the new book was created, the church book, if you will. And when I go here to the book selector, now I can move over to church book. When I go, I'm changed to church book, I'm going to go to my screen here and everything is going to be blank. That's because I'm starting fresh. That's the kind of state that I wanted to get in for today, because that's the best way to train a treasurer. If you are starting with a blank slate, they learn as you go through. So as opposed to just seeing everything that's already been done and trying to figure it out, you can start and train them with a fresh book. And if you're using Church 360 Ledger, go ahead and create a test book or something like that. You don't want to enter in a lot of test data in general unless it's all defined into a separate section. And so that's what we're doing today. Now, in the settings, we've got two different groups of settings. The settings at the top, these 5 here, are tied to the specific book that we're in, whereas the 5 settings below that is actually more about your general account. So your general settings has things like your church name, your account number with CPH, the check style, church address, all of those things. That's tied to your account. And that works the same for all of your books. Same with like users and roles. Now, users, you can have as many users as you want, and they can have as many different roles as you want. And their roles are what determines what they can do and what they can see. And so you see here, like if we go to financial secretary, this person can do things just for one book. So if you have people managing the different books, even though your users are managed at your account level, you can set aside who gets to do what book. And then of course there's the different things, can manage the chart of accounts, different transactions, what type of transactions they can do. Those are all pretty self-explanatory, and a treasurer usually can be able to do all of those. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about them other than let you know that you can get at a more granular level all the way down to individual accounts. So you can say these selected accounts can be seen by this user or really by that role. So like if you have a youth leader role, you give them the youth accounts and you assign that to your youth leader. But if the youth leader changes or you have multiple youth leaders, you just give them that same role. That's something that the treasurer will want to know about, but we've got plenty of help articles. And actually, I should point that out. Down here in the lower right-hand corner, you can click on that I button and see suggested articles. So if you have any questions about this or anything in Church 360 Ledger, go ahead and just type them in there, search for the article. If you don't find an article that's what you're asking, go ahead and send us a message. That'll go directly to our support team, and it'll also help influence what future articles we add. So feel free to do that at any time. And we also have a phone number down there. So you're always going to get the help you need. So that's why I'm not going to cover this too much. This is, while it's an important role or a task for the treasurer, that'll come later on once they understand how to use Ledger. So let's keep moving on. The next thing is the chart of accounts. You see, that's the first thing that's unique to this book. Now, chart of accounts, I usually spend a lot of time on this, and I don't want to say too much about it, but it is extremely important. This is the basis for all of your transactions, all of your reporting. If you don't get this right at the beginning, it's going to take you down a bad path. And when I say you don't get this right, I don't mean that you set it up wrong in the system. I mean, from a strategy standpoint, understanding what these different accounts do, which accounts your church needs, which things you need to budget for, which things you need to monitor. That's all so important to your ongoing financial success as a congregation. So I want to make sure this is very clear. And as you talk to the treasurer, that's going to be a key thing for them to understand. Now, hopefully they have a little bit of financial background if they're not an accountant, that these kind of make sense to them. But I'm going to put it into layman's terms. What we think about a lot with Ledger is that you are getting somebody who's a willing volunteer who is not a financial expert, but they're willing to learn. And so let's put it in those terms. The types of accounts are fourfold. The first type of account is called an asset. Now, I'm sure that term is very familiar to all of you. The assets I like to describe are actual bank accounts or actual locations where money is stored. So it might be a checking or a savings account. It might be a petty cash account. It might be an investment. This is where there's actual cash backing it up. Now, this is not when you would put the value of your church building. We use cash accounting here, or cash basis accounting in Church360 Ledger. So you're not going to put any estimated values anywhere. You're always going to put actual cash values. That's what goes into assets. Now, in a similar way, liabilities is actual cash or actual dollars that you owe to somebody. So if you have a mortgage on your church building, that goes under liabilities. If you have a church credit card, that goes under liabilities. That's cash that you actually have to pay. Now, there are different ways of accounting for gifts that are given to the church used for a specific purpose. And if you're coming from shepherd staff, you know we have dedicated accounts. And that's a little bit different than what we're talking about here. That in that concept, it's cash that's owed for a specific purpose. Liabilities is cash that's owed to a specific entity. Our dedicated accounts, that kind of idea, that money that is set aside for a purpose. I don't want to say owed, but set aside for a purpose. That's still assets because it's cash that you have. Whereas liabilities is only about cash that you owe someone else. So typically you're not going to see a lot of liabilities in your church chart of accounts. You're going to have some, most likely, but if you're in decent financial standing, you're not going to owe a lot of money to different entities. And if you do owe a lot of money to different entities, I would not call you in decent standing unless there's a plan to pay it off. So that's that kind of back and forth, you know, the two sides of a coin, money that you have and money that you owe. Now the next two accounts are similar to that. I don't like using that term like yin and yang. That brings in some different thought processes, but there's some parallel there where it's, you know, that two sides of a coin. Income and expense are that same kind of thing. Income is dollars coming in to the church, and expense is dollars going out. And so they mean opposite things, but they are often compared and contrasted together. So for example, when you're budgeting, a good barometer is to say we have the same amount of money coming in as we do coming out, kind of that zero bottom line. If you have more than zero, a positive number, then that's a surplus for a given fiscal year. And if you have less, then that's a deficit for a given fiscal year. This is really seen as you look at credits and debits. And that's what my next chart is here. Credits and debits should always align. Now, it's not a balanced transaction. And I know I'm getting pretty heavy into the financial terms right now. It's going to make sense as I get into transactions. And I like to share this screen with you, especially if you need to take notes on this. I refer back to this all the time. And I've had people on our support team, and I think even Dave has asked me for this too. This has been very helpful for me. I've shared this with our new treasurer. You don't have to have this memorized, but if you have an idea of how this is working, this will help you out a lot in Ledger. Ledger does all of this on kind of the back end of the system. So it takes care of the credits and debits so you don't have to learn about it. But you'll see that credits and debits are two different ways of entering a transaction. And depending on the type of account it is, a debit or a credit will increase or decrease the account. And so let's say, for example, that you have a, you want to always have the same value, I should say, you need to always have the same value on a transaction on the credit and debit side. So if you are making a deposit, money is coming in, you are getting more money, that's an increase of your income. Well, that's a credit. And if money is coming in, you're also saying, I'm taking cash and put it into a bank account. You're increasing that bank account. Well, that's a debit. So you're increasing both of them by the same amount, and it's on different sides of what's called a T chart, that debits and credits. That T chart where you have this vertical line between credit and debit and that horizontal line that separates, that category or header from the details. We'll look at that as we get into transactions. And I'm really just stating this in case you wanted to write this down. We can always share that, or you can take a screenshot later on. But let's get back into Ledger and see how this all works on the chart of accounts. You see, there's our 4 types of accounts. I'm going to go through this rather quickly because I gave you quite a bit of explanation. But there's 2 ways that you can add to the chart of accounts. The first way is a category. Think of categories like your folder system. They can't actually have transactions associated with them, but they're a way for you to group your accounts, what can have transactions, together. Let me show you an example. So a new category might say, I have accounts set up at American Bank. That is my category. Now the accounts I have a checking account, and I can write checks from this account. We're going to start with 0. And I have a savings account, but I can't write checks from that. I'm going to start that at 0 too. And they are both under American Bank. You see, these here are separate accounts underneath this category or folder of American Bank accounts. In the same way, well, let's go ahead and save that. Confirm. In the same way, under liabilities, you might have, let's say, we're going to call this national credit. You might have a church credit card with 0 balance, and you might have given a different one to the pastor's credit card. But they're still with the same account. The credit limits are tied together. It's just different names on the same account. There would be different accounts, but within that same company. So we could save that there. All right, so that's how you use categories versus accounts. Now, maybe you also have a separate sort of a bank account. So for example, we at my church have a separate bank account where all of our electronic offerings are deposited. So let's go ahead and call this new account, and we're going to call this Federal Bank. I'm just using all these generic terms. Federal Bank is where we get our actual electronic gifts, and we can write checks from that. But that's the only account I have with Federal Bank. So let's just use that and say Federal Bank checking account. We'll leave that right there. I could put a category in there, but since there's only one account in there, it doesn't really make that much sense. So I'll save, and you'll notice every time I save, it tells me exactly what I did. Now, Let's say you have those restricted accounts. This is something that really sets Ledger apart. And this is often a challenge for the new treasurer to think in these terms. When you have a gift given for a specific purpose, it becomes hard to separate that out. Now, there's different strategies for approaching this. Let's say you received a gift for $100 for confirmation classes. I'm going to be talking about confirmation in my Unite webinar, so I have that on the brain. But let's say you have a person in your congregation who says, that's really good that the youth are going through confirmation class right now. I want to give you $100 to spend on snacks and celebrations at the end of confirmation. Well, you could say, I'm going to put $100 in the checking account. I'm going to remember that that's supposed to be used for confirmation. But if you do that, you might forget, and you don't have any paper trail saying, well, this is for this purpose. That's where restricted funds come in. I'm going to go ahead and do a new restricted fund under checking. Whoops, there we go. And I'm going to call this confirmation class. And I should have mentioned this before. You don't need to use account numbers. We provide you that option, but they are not required. So my first restricted fund is confirmation class. I click submit. I'll actually click submit, there we go. And you'll notice that as soon as I add confirmation class, I now have a separate grouping called unrestricted. In any kind of asset account, if you have a restricted fund, you basically have your restricted funds and a single unrestricted. So it says everything that's set aside and the things that aren't set aside. This will make sense when we make a deposit in a little while. But that's how restricted funds work. They are all in the same asset accounts as everything else, but they are set aside for a specific purpose. Let me use a different analogy. You may have heard of this. It's not even really an analogy, it's an example. In your personal finances, you may have heard of the envelope system, where I think this was probably more popular back before electronic banking was such a big thing. But if you cashed your paycheck, you would say, all right, I got to pay for groceries. I got to pay for the utilities. I've got an envelope for each one of these. I'm going to put a certain amount of cash in this one, a certain amount of cash in this one, and anything left over is for expenses as they come up. Well, that's really what this restricted fund system is. The restricted funds are your envelopes. Your unrestricted is for anything that's left. Now, how you choose to divide that up, that's where that strategy comes into play. All right, let's go ahead and save my changes here. That's assets and liabilities. Income and expense is a different yet similar topic. So income is money that is coming in, and expenses are money that's coming out. Now, you don't want to think of income as assets and expenses as liabilities. That's not exactly how they work. Income and expenses are cash that is moving, and all cash ultimately is in an asset account in one way, shape, or form, whether it's in the bank account or in a petty cash account. It's a little bit different than that. So it's not a one-for-one assets and income, liabilities and expense, although there is a lot of overlap there. So we're going to do a new category that's called offerings. And we'll click submit, and then we're going to add a new account called general. Well, let's call it operating fund. Operating fund. This is let's call it general operating fund. I use general all the time. It's really an undefined amount. This is your utilities, your salaries, that sort of thing. People don't give to pay for salaries or give to pay for the electric bill. They give for the general operating expenses of the congregation. So most of your gifts should be coming under that. And then you might have one that is missions or something like that. We're going to go ahead and make that an initial balance of 0, and we'll put that under offerings too. And you might even have one that you just called restricted offerings. Maybe you don't get something for confirmation that often, but if you do, it's going to go under restricted offerings. Now, what other kind of income would you get at a church? Churches are nonprofit organizations. They don't have a business. That's not always true. When you think about it, income, if it's not a gift, is in exchange for goods or services. Well, churches don't sell a lot of goods, but they will often earn income for services. So if we do a new category called services, you might have something like facility rental. I use that example all the time. We rent out our fellowship hall, usually to members for like parties. We have our kids' birthday parties there when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. And we pay, I don't even remember what it is, $50 or $100 for the afternoon to use the rental or the facilities, pardon me. So that's another kind of income that you might put in there. Let's go ahead and save these changes. What about expenses? Well, I don't think it's hard to figure out what kind of expenses you have in your congregation, or at least some examples of it. It might be hard to document all of them because there's a lot of expenses. So you might have a category called salaries, or payroll, we'll call it payroll, and then a new account under payroll for full-time salaries, and a different one for part-time salaries. We'll put those under payroll. You might have another category called ministries. Let's do plural, ministries. And under there, you might have one for Vacation Bible School, and another for confirmation class. Move it under there. And you might also have a category for utilities. Utilities, there we go. And so you might have like electric, or new account, gas. Heat and air conditioner are always the things I think about a lot. So you have these different ones. You'll probably have a really long list of expenses and a much shorter list of income, and your assets and your liabilities will vary. That's my guess. There's a lot of expenses that hit a congregation in various ways, because things like payroll and utilities, those all come out of your operating fund. And so all of your income comes into one account, and all the expenses are divided up to give you visibility. That goes into the accountability we talked about before. So don't feel bad if you have lots of expense accounts. It's all about visibility. Let's go ahead and save these changes. When you get a new treasurer, you probably are not going to rewrite your chart of accounts, because you should be doing that and looking at it, reviewing it on an annual basis to say, do we have the right accounts in place? But it's a very good practice for your treasurer to go down one by one on each account to understand exactly what that account does. And you know, the best time to do that is when you're budgeting for a new fiscal year. And that's where we're headed next. We're not done with our chart of accounts if we were going to use this tomorrow. But for demonstration purposes, we're going to be done for right now. The next step is to go in and add budgets. So under settings, that's the second thing here, budgets. Now, budgets are only for income and expense, because those are defined by given timeframes. You'll see here on our budgets, we start at September and we end at August on the far right-hand side. Now, I'm zoomed in, so it goes farther than the screen, but if I zoomed out, you'll see that it fits within the screen. Let me zoom in for your benefit. The reason you do that by a time frame is that you don't need to worry about budgeting for your assets. Your assets are the single accounts where money comes in and money goes out, and you don't need to worry what your balance is going to be at the end of each month. But you want to know, do we have enough money coming in to pay for the money going out? And so that's when you start to look at this. It's also a good way to evaluate it mid-year to say, how are we going according to plan? And that's what budgets are. They're a plan. They're not predicting the future. It's just saying, this is our best guess at this point in time. Now that timing is tied to fiscal years. That's the third one on here. Fiscal years is something you won't do too much at any given time, but you'll notice that this is our current fiscal year, 2019 to 2020. And then as you go to budget, you get to choose which fiscal year you're working on. Are you doing this year or next year, 2020 to 2021? When you go into any year, you get the opportunity to type in the amounts, but you can also pull from previous years if you've done that, if you've completed it. So your first go round with Ledger, you're not going to have that data in there, but your next go round, you can pull from previous year's actuals or budgets. Now you can type things in pretty easily. You can type in 1,000, tab to the next, or you can say typically on a given year we get $300,000 given to a general offering, and that works out to about $25,000 a month. Now you can go and change individual months. Maybe December's better because you have Christmas in there. It'll update your total. So you have a number of different ways you can enter this. You can also download this to Excel. If you're like me, I love Excel. I'm not an accountant, but I could be. I like Excel that much. And then paste it in here. So there's different ways of doing that. We have other trainings that show you that in great detail. So I just want to talk about how budgets are a key part of bringing a new treasurer on, because you have to go account by account, at least on income and expense. And that's a fantastic process for the new treasurer to go through so they know what they're looking for. Because the treasurer is the one to report to the congregation, how are we doing as we plan to do? Are we getting as much income in as we expected? Are we getting less? Do we need to cut down our expenses? Are we spending more than we planned to? Why? Those are all things that are done on a monthly basis, if not more frequently, and you need to be able to understand what each of those means. So that's where having a treasurer go through, budget everything, or if it's already budgeted for this fiscal year, review the budget, ask questions, what things don't make sense. So that's budgets. Let's talk about transactions. Let me go ahead and save that budget. There we go. We're going to go back here. Now, typically you start the fiscal year with dollars in your asset account and in your liability account. And maybe we should do that. If I go back to chart of accounts, I can do that. In fact, you can do that at any time until you reconcile your account, basically saying, yep, this is the balance as of today. So let's say I have $200,000 in my, that's my checking account. Let's say I have $50,000 in my checking account and $200,000 in my savings. And I'll go ahead and save those changes. I've got the new beginning balances. You'll notice that in American Bank, we have $250,000 there because we have 50,000 in the one and 200,000 in the other. You'll also notice that I have $50,000 of unrestricted and nothing under confirmation because I have that unrestricted and I haven't set it aside. Let's talk about transactions. So you'll remember from this chart that you have debits and credits and they increase or decrease based on what you put where. Well, in Ledger, you have your new transaction path. I'm going to start at the bottom, journal entries. If I'm doing a journal entry, I need to understand credits and debits. We've designed the screen to be familiar looking, meaning if you used to write checks, many people didn't, usually you'd have like a deposit slip in the back of those checkbooks, and they look similar to this. Now they don't have credits and debits, but the rest of it is kind of outlined in that way. Let's say we were depositing offerings for the week. And so we say offerings for the week August 6th. And maybe we did that August 6th. Wow, that's not even the start of the week. August 9th. There we go. Let's say we did that on the 10th. You put what date the transaction occurred. Now there's not a payee because there's more than one. So the first thing we're going to do is we're making a deposit. Okay, that means I'm going to be putting money in my asset account. So here's my checking account, unrestricted. We'll put that there. Now, if I go back to my chart, if I'm adding money to an asset, I need to debit it to increase it. All right, I'm going to put in $1,000 right there. Well, where's that money coming from? If I go back to my chart, I have to have a credit. Well, what increases it? Is it income or expense? Well, obviously it's income. That's money coming in. And we credit it. We increase that. And so if I go back here, all right, I need to say it's coming in under the general operating fund, $1,000. I have 1,000 credits, or $1,000 in debits and $1,000 in credits, and they balance. You see it's green now. I could enter that in. That's a lot of thinking. Thinking's not a bad thing, but thinking is where you could potentially make mistakes. And so what we've done is say, we've given you some transaction paths to make it easier so you don't have to think the whole time. If you go up here, you could say, well, I'm making a deposit. Here's my deposit transaction path. You'll see it tells you, it says, what asset are you putting in? Well, I'm putting it in my checking account, and it's $1,000. What income is it? Well, it's only from the general operating fund. You see, this income limits the list to the general operating fund. So I'll say, okay, general operating fund is $1,000. It does my credits and debits for me. It's the same thing I was doing before, but I'm not having to think which is which, where does it go? It's right there for me. Now let's say part of that $1,000 was the $100 to the confirmation class. Well, I want to make sure that I put that in there. So confirmation class, $100, then this becomes $900. And it wasn't all to the general operating fund. Some of it was for restricted offerings. So I go in here, I type in 100. You'll notice that now I have a blank line over here that says 100. That's because these transaction paths always want to be balanced. So as soon as I clear out that 1,000 and say actually 900 of it was for operating, I've now got my same bottom line here. The deposit is still the same, but I've split my transaction into these two different things. And it's still balanced, but everything has the right credits and debits. So we'll go ahead and save that. All right, we'll give it a second to save. Sometimes when I present, it takes longer than I mean for it to do. Let me double check while we're talking. Dave's been answering the questions, but it's always good for me to see. All right, there, that transaction was created. Very good. Let's go back to my home page real quick. You'll see now we are starting to have some lines showing. Now we don't have a lot yet, and it's slowly loading those balances. American Bank now has 251,000 because we made a deposit, and it's showing those different line items. And as I drill down and I go down checking, and let's go to confirmation class, you'll see it's going to filter my list. My goodness, this is going slow. I apologize. Every time I present, it goes slow. You'll see here, there is that line for that specific account. It filters the list by the account. Let's do a couple more transactions. The next one is, let's say we spent money on pizza. All right, well, there's a payment. So a payment is money going out. We're gonna say pizza party for the confirmation class. And that was last night, Wednesday. And we're taking it out of our confirmation class. That's what it's for. And let's say it was $55. What's the expense? Well, we don't have a pizza party expense account, but we do have a confirmation class expense account. And you'll see it does my debits and credits for me. Now I have the debits or credits or the accounts named the same, but what I'm really doing is I'm decreasing my asset. I'm taking money out of the bank, and I'm increasing my expenses. My expenses for confirmation class have gone up, and you'll see that's over here on debit. So even though the names are the same, my accounts are applied appropriately because I can only put in a confirmation class there under expense. And I can only put in, an expense account under expense, and I can only put an asset under asset. That's the only options. That transaction path narrows my choices down to what is right so that it can put the correct debits and credits in there. So there we go. I'll go ahead and hit save. And now my balance has gone down. Now that I have 2 points, it started out at 100 and it goes down to 45 because I have an expense there. So you'll see there it is. Now this all works pretty well in an example, but it works even better when you have to start thinking about a complicated transaction. Well, what goes where, what goes where? that's when these paths really become helpful. So let's go write a check next. A check is the same kind of a payment, but it's not done in the same manner. So a payment is for something like a credit card, whereas a check is saying, or a debit card is a good example because it's coming out of the bank account. A check is saying it's coming out of the same accounts, but I actually have to print a check. Many churches will print their own checks, do it in a queue. So let's say I was actually going to buy some confirmation materials from Concordia Publishing House, a fantastic place to buy confirmation materials. So I'll say confirmation materials. My asset is coming straight out of that dedicated, the restricted fund. The dollars dedicated for a specific purpose. And I'll say, all right, well, I'm just going to get the leader's guide. I think, let's say it's $24.99, and that is a confirmation class expense. And it is coming out of this bank account. That bank account number or account there is going to be pre-printed on your check. And it says pay to the order of for this purpose, all of that fun stuff. Now your credits and debits, all of that is the same thing, but when I go to hit save, now it says the check was added to your print queue. That's a little bit different kind of transaction. You see up here in the top right, there's a print queue, and that check is ready to be printed. Many churches, out of efficiency's sake, will only print checks on a couple days. Even here at the publishing house, we only print checks on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's because it's a little bit of a hassle to bring the check paper, put it into the printer, make sure nothing else is printing at that time, and print it out. So you want to do a bunch at one time. You want to batch it together. Well, that's what you can do here. We only have one right now, but if I go here, I select it, I click print, it's going to show me what it looks like. It puts all of the different details on it. In this case, our check is actually the middle portion of the sheet of paper. And if I go click print, I can then put in the number and click confirm, and it's going to show me a print preview of what actually prints on the check. You see, I mentioned before, the bank account in the top left corner of the check will be pre-printed on the check for security reasons. So we don't actually print anything there. And we have a top stub and a bottom stub, one for us, one for the person we're sending the check to. So I don't need to get into too much details on this other than to show you how that works. But then you can say, I'm going to mark that as printed. It'll be removed from the check queue, and I can no longer edit it because it was printed. It's kind of fixed in time. All right, so that's checks. If I could dive in deeper into American Bank and checking account. The next thing, and I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit over. I'm not going to be able to show all the details, but I'm going to get most of it. The next thing is I've printed the check. The treasurer's job is to reconcile the account. What does reconcile mean? Well, sometimes you hear it say, I'm going to balance my bank account. It's saying I'm going to take what has been given to me by the bank, that monthly statement, and make sure it matches what's in Church360 Ledger. You can only do this at an account level. You see, I'm at my checking account here. The bank doesn't know anything about whether there's unrestricted or restricted funds here. It only knows what's at that checking account. And in the same way, they're not going to send me a total for all of my accounts. So at American Bank, I don't have the opportunity to reconcile. It's only at an account level. So if I go here and I click reconcile, it takes me into the reconcile mode. When you get a bank statement, you're going to have a specific time range on there. You want to make sure that you put that statement date on there. When was this generated? So it probably is at an end of month time frame. It'll give you a starting balance and ending balance. And if it doesn't lay those out, you just go down the list and see the starting balance is this and the ending balance is that. So in this case, the starting balance was $50,000. Oops. And the ending balance is $50,920.01. So $920.01. Well, there are 3 different transactions here that should add up to $920.01. You see, as we start looking at this, we had a $1,000 deposit, and I see that on my bank statement, my imaginary bank statement. All right, $1,000, got that. All right, $55, got that. And up here it says a check number 697. Well, there's 697, and I check that off. When the difference, this off by right here is 0, then you can reconcile it. Now, let's say that you got the bank statement before the check cleared. Well, in that case, your bank statement's not going to be 509201. It's going to be 50945. So if you only have these two transactions showing, you can reconcile it. And this one will come up next month. That's how that process works. Now, most likely your accounts are going to have far more than 3 line items. I know our church does. And so you have the ability to quickly filter by an amount, by a memo. Like you said, maybe you have a check in there and it says $24.99, but you're not sure what it's for. Well, you start typing in the amount, it'll filter down the list by that amount, and you just select that if it's the right thing to do. All right, we'll clear that. I'm going to hit save. Oops. Save, there we go. And the line items were reconciled, which means that they are locked. All right, we are almost out of time. I'm going to show you something real quickly. This is not hard, and this is why I always save it for the end, because it's pretty straightforward. But one of the key things a new treasurer does, or any treasurer does, is print off reports for the church leadership. If you click on this drop down, you will see we have a general ledger report, income and expense, chart of accounts. These are all standard financial reports. So if I go here to income and expense, this is showing what we budgeted versus what we actually have. I might want to do this for just a month. This is where the time frame comes in. You'll see here that right now it says 2020. At the top, I have my 2019-2020 fiscal year. I could do it by quarters. You know, this is quarter 4, quarter 3. You'll see that you've got these different time frames in there. Maybe I want to just see what happened in August. August 2021, 2020. You'll see this is just the August report. Now, I didn't have anything budgeted, but you've got these different date selector options. I could even just click on August right here and then pre-fill it. Maybe I look at July. So this will change your report, and then you can collapse some of these tree items. So maybe you don't want to show all of the details, or maybe you only want to show some of them. You could do that and then print out this report. Or better yet, just let your user go in and see it. You could set a read-only account level so that people can just pull it up on their devices as opposed to printing paper. All right, I think that is enough for right now. There's so much more I can show you in Ledger, but those are the core things that as you're preparing a new treasurer, you want to get them ready to go by looking at those key things. So we went over the chart of accounts after we set up a book. We added budgets, we added transactions, we reconciled, and we briefly looked at reports. We also talked about users and roles. So I think that's probably enough for one day, but I'd be curious what questions you have. I know we have a few in there. I'll be happy to answer any that Dave hasn't gotten to yet, or Dave can answer them during the Q&A. But Dave, I think it's time to pass it back over to you. So if you want to take control and get into your final slides before we wrap up here at 11 o'clock Central Time, it is all yours, so you can take it away. And don't forget to unmute yourself too.
Got it. Okay. Did you hand that back to me?
Hang on one second. Let me make you, I should have done it. There we go. All right, you should now be the presenter, so you can share your screen.
Fantastic. Okay.
There you go.
All right. Well, good. So we had a couple questions during the webinar here today. One of the final ones, and I just answered this one, was in regards to printing the checks. You can print directly from the software to a check when you're doing a transaction by check and making that payment. And the question was also will it automatically forward the number on the check to the next number that would be used in succession, um, based upon the last number that we used, the last check number? And the answer is yes, it will do that. However, it will also give you the option um, to change that check number if need be, meaning that yes, I'm using this automatically, and most all the time it's correct. It's going right to that next number. But what in if in case I manually wrote a check in between, and just did that real quick without going into the Ledger software, I can actually I could change that, number. If for any reason that you needed to do that, you could change that check number. But yes, it will automatically move forward that number in succession for you. So any other questions, you can certainly pop them in to the chat area, and I'll be glad to answer that. And if not, I'll just continue on here as well. So I'll let Peter, you can jump in there too if you see any question, and I'll let you kind of get that also. I'm going to jump to our next slide here because there's just one, two more here that we have. We do keep our pricing on our website, so I do want to let you know that that's always there on actually all of our products. The pricing is always on there. Now, one thing I want to show here is that you do have the option of monthly or annual pricing. We always built in a discount for churches when you're paying for the software annually, but also you're going to get additional discounts off the software of Ledger if in fact you do have a current subscription with the Church360 members, and you'll get an additional discount if you have the Church360 Unite. So those are different options that you'll have there too. As far as pricing, you'll be able to increase your discount if you have subscriptions with other products. We do, and I want to highlight this, all throughout the process of your subscription with Ledger, we offer support. So that means you need help, you need assistance, you want to talk to someone, you can certainly do that, and call in and speak with us. Or there is a information center built into the 360 Ledger software that Peter talked about, with that little blue eye in the lower right-hand corner. And you can send in your question or need assistance through there too. So that's available, and included in the startup, and you'll see the startup fee there too, is training. So we will provide individualized training for you as beginning with the 360 Ledger. We want to make sure that you have a great understanding in how to use the software, from setting up your chart of accounts and knowing how to do that, to completing transactions, or even reconciliation, and some of those things that Peter walked us through today. So I'm going to go on to our next slide here. Again, whoops, let me back up there. It just jumped twice. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me via email here. You can reach me at dave.farnham@cph.org. Or if it's quicker or easier, we have a number of individuals that can reply to you if you go into just software sales at cts.cph.org. So we will be glad to answer any questions that you have. Let's see. I think that Peter is also responding to some of the questions as well here.
Indeed, I accidentally responded in the chat, but the question was, does Church 360 contributions automatically upload to Ledger? So when you're entering offerings in Church 360 members, yes, it does come over as a pending transaction. And I should have showed that. I was going to, but I kind of ran out of time. But yeah, that's one of those pending transactions that can come over. Other pending transactions would be like a reoccurring transaction that almost serves as a reminder to enter, like utility bills and such. But those offerings come over as a predefined pending transaction with the right accounts and the right totals and everything.
Yep, fantastic. Thanks, Peter. And yes, that has been a great help and from a lot of churches to know that, hey, we have the 360 members. When that offering batch has been entered and completed, then it shows up. And as Peter mentioned, it shows up as a pending transaction for your deposit. But you'll also see the little icon that looks like the members icon. It's a green icon, but that will indicate that this has come over from the 360 members software. Fantastic. No, that's a great question. I'm glad somebody asked that today. I'm going to just end with this final slide here too, and that is start if you're interested at all. Even if you just want to play with a different software, you're here just you know and this is your first initial investigation, go to the website 360ledger.com and start your free 37-day trial. We do make that a 37-day trial. Sounds weird. Why 37 days? And that's because we want to give you a full month to play around with the software, but include that extra 7 days because we don't know when your statement's going to come through. We want to give you extra time to even reconcile some of your accounts and do the reconciliation there too. So we want to give you plenty of time to be able to use the software. We realize everyone has busy schedules, but that's why we've extended, kind of made that a 37-day trial. And finally, you'll see on the right side of the screen right now, the 360 Unite logo. And at the bottom here, the last one is, hey, visit our 360unite.com /training, and you can sign up for that Unite webinar this afternoon. We would be more than happy to have you. Again, on behalf of Concordia Technology Solutions and Peter and myself, Dave Farnham, I am glad that you chose to join us today. I know that you have a busy schedule, but thank you so much for joining us. I hope this has been helpful for you. And feel free to contact me if you do have questions, or give us a call either way, and we will be glad to assist you. So again, thank you so much for your time. And you can continue to ask a question in the chat area if you need to, but this concludes our webinar for today. Have a wonderful day and a fantastic week. Join us this afternoon if you can, if that's of interest for you, and God bless you.